Hi there, this is my artist statement and reflection on the collection of poetry that I did for curriculum and instruction, humanities, social studies, English, and other humanities subjects 3. So I decided that to reflect on my practicum experience, I would write a collection of poetry about everything that I encountered on practicum. Now, each of these experiences were decidedly very different from one another. Some were very positive, some were very negative. Some were positive for me, some were positive for the students. Some were about learning, some were about behavior management, and some were just musings on what it meant to be on practicum. So the first one that I wrote was called Arteries, which was a reflection on my time spent on the highway driving to and from Vanderhoof. This time was a deeply reflective time for me, and on which I was able to reflect on my time that I'd spent during the day when I was heading home and plan for the day ahead when I was driving there. Also, it was time for me to really think about what it meant and what I was doing there, whether it was positive or negative. And it was an opportunity for me to really think deeply about the work that I was doing. And Arteries was designed as a really deeply reflective piece about a deeply reflective time in my practicum. It's something that I think was done quite effectively and was a story that shows both the mental turmoil and the benefits that I got from this experience. The next one that I did was Dirty Hands, which was about the archaeological dig that I did with my Comparative Civilizations 12 class. The actual activity itself, I would say, is probably my most successful lesson during this practicum, as it got a number of students who normally refused to do any work or conduct any research. It got them thinking about historical themes and the work of the historian, as well as gave them connections to the land. The idea of Dirty Hands bringing people into contact with the land was the theme of the poem, and I think that it's one that really effectively shows my land-based and place-based form of education is incredibly important. The next one that I wrote was called Screams at Sea, which was a haiku about one of my students. He was a very difficult student who encountered a number of very difficult behavior management issues, and he had kind of been struggling through the entire semester. And this poem was about how a lot of the time to him it felt like he was just screaming into the void, that no one was actually listening to him, which was something that in my numerous conversations with him when he was really struggling, it seemed like that was a pretty common theme in his educational experience. The next one, called Morse Code, is a short poem that is about it's a short poem about how students sometimes are quite apathetic, and especially in both of my practicum classes. Morse Code was about how, despite being silent and despite seeming disinterested, that students were often not ready for asking for help, and they were often unsure of how to swim in the swirling seas of education. The last one, entitled The Stories We Tell, was a more reflective piece about the importance of the job of teaching. One of the most successful aspects of my social studies 10 class was when I would tell them a war story with every lecture. During the lecture, I would find someone who had served in the Second World War or lived through the events, and then I would tell their story to my classes. Now, quite often that class was very disinterested in what we were talking about, or would show very little interest, and this particular piece demonstrates the few times that they were actually completely engaged with their learning and completely interested. During this time, they would stop whatever they were doing, and as I was telling the story, they would actually seem very engaged. So this poem was a reflection on the role of the teacher as a storyteller, passing on stories of those who came before, particularly in the case of the social studies teacher. And it was essentially a tribute to the profession, one that I believe isn't seen often enough, and it's an aspect of our teaching career that I feel that a lot of people forget about, that in the end we truly are storytellers, passing on stories of our culture and cultures that came before us, or that we are simply interrelated with in this great human experience. So yeah, that is my collection of poetry. I hope you enjoy it.